Hey, what's up everyone? My name is Mark and this is Mark's Coding Project. On this channel I hope to share with you my programming journey. So I am 19 years old and I am an aspiring software developer. So in order to become a software developer, the best way is to build yourself a programming portfolio. And that's what I'm doing. So I thought I would share with you the projects that I'm going to be making and adding to my portfolio in the hope that you guys can steal some ideas, maybe learn a few tips and tricks, that kind of thing. Just a general knowledge share. So what we're going to be talking about today. In the last video, we talked about the difference between the connections file and our connections list in our server. So if our server goes down, we have this connections text file as a backup, and it's going to retain all of the games that are being played on the server at that time. This is because that job is primarily taken care of by the connections, by this connections list. However, if the server goes down, the list goes down. So the information needs to be stored in a hard copy somewhere else. With that in mind, I messed about a little bit in my save connection and write connection methods over the past two videos. And we've made a few changes so that we can now, when the server's adding a new connection, it checks to see if the new connection already has an opponent in the text file. Now, the problem with that is the fact that I have set it up so that you'll notice here this system.out and the scanner class and all this business, all of this is sat on the server. So what that means is that when a connection joins, this text will be output to the server, but it won't be output to the client. So it was just a total oversight on my part. What we need to happen is we need for the client to see this information. So this needs to be printed out in the client console, and the response needs to be taken from the client console, not the server console. So very, very similar to a couple of videos I did a good few weeks ago. If you remember, we have these input and output methods. What they do is they can communicate with our client applications. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be sort of moving this code to the client via an input and an output process. So for starters, we will make the output. So the output, if you remember, is the data that we are sending to the client. Well, in this case to the client, basically it's going to be the data that we send to whoever is connected to us. In this instance, it's the client. If you're on the client, then our output will go to the server. So it's just whoever you're connected to, any information you want to send to them needs to be output. So we're going to start by making a method called output to client. Or we're going to call it out to client because that sounds good too. I'm joking. Put that there. So you'll notice it's static and it is void. We don't need a return type. The data is going to the client. We don't need to receive anything. So there is no return type. So we've set it to void, and it's static because we're going to be executing it within our save connections. So basically the output method is going to sit in place of this here. Okay, so since this method here is static, our output to client method must also be static. So what do we want as a parameter? Well, if you take a look at our connection container, typically what I've done is I have put the output, the data that we're going to be sending, as a parameter, but also you'll notice the socket. The socket is also something that we use quite frequently. Now, we have a getSocket method in our connection container class. However, we don't have one in the server class. So I think it's necessary to add the socket as a parameter and the data that we're going to be writing. So we'll just call them S and data. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to be a bit cheeky and we're going to copy. We're just going to copy and paste this code. It's identical. Output streams and print writers, it's the same every time. If you've got special, if you've got any sort of special requirements, you're probably going to need to do some research into this further, but this is a very, very standard way of doing things. So this can just be lifted out from any file that we have this. We have this in the connection container, and we have pretty much identical code in our client as well. See, differences in our client, we pass the socket as we're doing in the server. So you'll notice we've got this red text on our get socket method. It's because it doesn't exist. So instead we need to put S, because that refers to our socket. Finally, you'll notice I started putting try, as I'm me getting ahead of myself. So the output stream must either be executed within a try statement or must throw an exception. So we're going for the try statement option. So we just need to surround the code in a try catch. Exception E, and then we're going to do a print stack trace. Okay. So what do we need to do now? So we've handled our exception, we've configured our output stream, we've configured our print writer. Now we just need to write what do we need to write? We need to write data. Why am I being so daft? We have a parameter for it. Let's use it. So that looks good to me. So we're taking the specific socket, getting its output stream, and we're writing data to it. Arguably the more challenging side of this is actually the parameter. So the reason that I've configured this in such a way is that this can be applied to any connection, since the socket is just a generic socket. It doesn't matter who it is, whether it's a client, whether it's an opponent, whether it's a completely different connection, doesn't matter. It's just a socket, so it can be anybody. And the data can be anything. The data just has to be a string. So all of the more technical stuff, like picking out a specific socket or sending a specific piece of information, or potentially converting a specific piece of information. Say you have numbers and you need to convert them, you have integers and you need to convert them to a string. All of that needs to be done outside of the actual method. So firstly, we're quite lucky in the fact that our save connection method receives the socket as a parameter. You notice up here, and this refers to the client socket. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste it. Equally, the data is already a string, so I can leave that as it is, and I don't need to change that at all. But you'll notice the key difference now is that this string isn't going to be printed to the server console. It's going to be sent to whoever it is that is on the other end of this socket. Now, step 2 is going to be configuring our input. I thought I would split it based on application. So some of you may be wondering, okay, well, we need to configure the input for the client. And I'm thinking, I'm going to do that in the next video. I don't want to do that in this video. I think we're going to go server side in this video and then client side in the next video. So for input on the server at least, we're going to want to return a string because the client will be sending a string. And I know that because I'm going to make them. Input from client. Here we go. And then I think the only parameter we're going to need this time is a socket, for the same reason that we need a socket in the output. So in the output, we use the socket to get the output stream. In the input, you guessed it, we're going to use it to get the input stream. Cool. So now we're going to be receiving input from the client. What do we want to do? We want to make a string variable called response. And we are going to read our input using our reader, and we're going to save that input to a response variable, which is just a string, and we're going to return that string to our, well, whoever it is that's executing this code. So we need to move this variable to outside of the try statement, string response, and then we're just going to give it a generic value. So the generic value is, I'm going to call it connection failed. And the reason for that is because if this value is returned, that means that this has failed. So the only time that this response will be returned is if you receive nothing from the user. And you may be saying, well, it could connect to the user and will receive nothing back. I'm not going to allow that to happen. So when we code it on the client side, the client is going to have to return a value. And if they don't, it's just going to keep on asking them. So the only way that we won't return a value from here is if the input string fails. We'll hit the catch statement. And since we've set a default value for response, that is what will be returned from this method's execution. So what do we want to do with the method? Well, first of all, we're using it to replace our scanner. So we're going to get rid of our scanner. Next, we're going to simply retain our response to a variable, in a variable, sorry. That's looking pretty good to me. There's also the chance that our answer, or our answer variable is going to return, if you'll remember, a connection failed. So answer could be set equal to connection failed. And what do we do? What do we want to do if that happens? Well, I think if we make an else if statement, and if we do answer dot equals, if I can spell answer, answer dot equals failed response. It's probably best if I copy and paste this so that I don't get it wrong, because we're ignoring cases. And the reason for that is because this is just going to be a standard, so there's no need to ignore. Oh dear, if I click something, I have. Sorry, okay, so I'm just going to copy and paste this. We're going to copy and paste our connection failed. And we're going to say, okay, if our answer equals this, then what do we want to do? I think we want to loop back round. So we're going to try again, and we're going to keep trying. Do I want to say indefinitely? I don't know. That's a tricky one. That's a real tricky one. Because the thing is that if we find, yeah, I think the problem you've got is the fact that this still isn't a complete solution. So we need to have fail safes in place. So say this process is happening, right? So we've found our opponent. Our opponent then goes offline for some reason. Maybe they're playing another game, they finish the game, they think, right, I'm bored, and they miss our notification. What are we going to do? Well, we need to update our connections list. But the problem is there is no updating, so there is no removal of connection containers yet. That hasn't been built. So this is we're kind of future-proofing, if that makes sense. So we've set this up with the intention that if we find a connection failed, we will go around again. And presumably, fingers crossed, hopefully, whatever, we're going to have it so that if our opponent disconnects, when they get to the if statement, it won't find them. So the idea is to say, I don't know, so just, pretend that's our opponent, right? This is our list. Okay, so let me redo this slightly. 2, 3, 4. Yeah, there we go. That's not a port number. There we go. Okay, so say this is our list, and this is our opponent. Hopefully, the idea is that if we do this, our opponent disconnects, we remove them from the list. If things then move into place, okay, so our opponent disconnects during this process. That thing that I just showed you, this is happening separately while this code is being executed. So the idea is that by triggering this, your counter, so when it was audit, when it was, what have I done? Yeah, so when it was here, x equaled 3. Well, technically x would equal 2, but let's not get into it. We'll say x equaled 3. So we delete this. Okay, if we then deduct 1 off of x, x is still going to equal 3. However, this time it's a different port and IP number. So my thinking is that it won't match and it will just carry on the code. And actually, in theory, in this example, say that was your only opponent, this one here, you won't find another match, and therefore it will just connect you to a brand new game. And that is it. So thank you very much for watching, guys. Please do like, comment and subscribe. The source code is in GitHub, which I'll put a link to in the description. So if you want to go check that out, feel free. And hopefully I'll see you back here for the next video.